Hello and welcome to Witness. I'm Awad Joumaa. The troubled past of Israel's birth as a nation and the devastating consequences it's had in the region frequently make headlines around the world and fill our screens with images of political turmoil. But the reality of what 6 decades of displacement has meant for the day-to-day lives of those who have lived there rarely makes the news. Al Jazeera's news editor, Awad Joumaa, went on a journey spanning 2 continents and 3 countries to bring that reality to life. In his moving and deeply personal film, Journey Home, Awad took his father back to the place he was born, but has never known.
When I think of the past, I remember my second home, Lebanon. I spent 40 years of my life there, my childhood, my youth. Palestine I only know as a distant memory.
The cold shores of Denmark are a far cry from Hussein Joumaa's real homeland. I know this because Hussein is my father. And this is the story of our first journey home to what was once Palestine. Starting in Denmark, our journey goes to Lebanon and hopefully back to Palestine. At 60, he now lives in exile in Denmark with my family.
Most brilliant cooking.
But our story begins in 1948, in the place my father was forced to flee. The same year the new state of Israel was created. It was chaos. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced from their homes, Jewish militias seizing their land. My father, a mere baby, was among the refugees. Our family wound up in a refugee camp in Lebanon, where my father spent most of his life. But men of his generation could not forget the injustice of being expelled from their homeland. And over time, the Palestinian resistance became a casualty in Lebanon's civil war. And as a PLO member, Lebanon was no safe place for my father. The only option, exile.
I had to leave Lebanon at all costs. My life was in danger because I was a known figure in the Palestinian resistance at a difficult time, and people were watching me. I wouldn't see you again for nearly a year, always worrying for your safety.
My father made it to Denmark. To that he's grateful.
Denmark has given us a lot. Most importantly, it gave us security. We discovered democracy and rights as human beings. We built a home. Our children got an education.
Denmark is where I grew up. It's the only home I know. But for our parents, there was always something missing.
Life goes in stages. As a human being, whenever one phase passes, you long for that phase. When I look sometimes at the few old pictures we have left, I think of the past, the present, and maybe even the future.
Now retired, my father tries to find peace in the garden he keeps. He calls it his breathing space.
It represents the land I lost, the homeland I never had, which I long for. In Lebanon, as Palestinians, we couldn't own a piece of land. Every season I came here to grow my plants and spend time with my family.
Denmark may be home now, but it can't replace the memories of our past. So on the eve of our journey back to Lebanon, and hopefully to Palestine, my father reflects.
I'm very excited to see my family in Lebanon, go back and see the places and relive the memories of the many years we lived there. But there's also a longing to see Palestine. to touch the soil, see where my family once lived, the place I was born. All these things make me anxious. A million questions run through my mind.
It has been 3 years since my father was last here, Lebanon. We retrace our family's steps in the south, where he first arrived as a refugee in 1948.
My family stayed in South Lebanon for 4 months. The weather was cold. Many newborns and elderly died in those harsh winters. It was my uncle who'd first been to Galilee camp. He told my father we should move there. We could get shelter.
Our family moved north to Baalbek, famous for its ancient Roman ruins. But just down the road is the refugee camp where my father grew up. It was set up by the United Nations 60 years ago. The camp was supposed to be temporary, but it still stands today.
Life was tough for everyone. Food was short, and the main barracks were very exposed to the cold. My father arranged for a small shelter that had once been used as a French army stable. I still remember the rings where they used to tie the horses.
We're now at the heart of Baalbek refugee camp. I was born here in this very small house. It's basically one room with a small attachment of a kitchen and a toilet, and that's it. When we lived here for 4 years, it wasn't pleasant. Extremely cold at winter time and extremely hot at summertime. So you get it at both ends, he said.
Life in the camp was a challenge, and it caused my father to pose difficult questions.
I always used to ask my father, why do we live like this? Why do we live in a camp? People outside had homes and gardens. Why didn't we? So my father began to explain our situation. In time, I came to understand what Nakba meant to us. My father showed me the land deeds to our home in Palestine. As a child, I used to stand at the gate and ask the police, why do you lock us in? It always happened when the officials came to town. I couldn't understand. We just wanted to play outside the camp, like other kids.
In the camp, we met Saleh and Abu Thayer, 2 of my father's old friends. Together, the 3 of them had joined the Palestinian resistance in Lebanon. Inspired by the Algerian resistance against the French occupation, my father's generation, raised in exile, began to rise up.
I could see parallels in our lives. We had an occupied homeland, so did they. We started asking ourselves, shouldn't we also be fighting for our homeland? We knew what we wanted. We just wanted arms so we could liberate Palestine. In the camp, I met other young men like me. We agreed that we needed to organize ourselves. It wasn't as simple as just picking up arms. It was much more complicated than that. One day, Abu Thayer returned to the camp having moved away. He told us there was a movement called the Palestine Liberation Front and said we needed to join this organization.
Our work was completely secret because Palestinians were not allowed to organize. If we were caught, we'd face harassment, imprisonment, even torture. We used to meet right here, behind this stone.
This resistance continued to grow in the shadows of Arab regimes. But after those very regimes lost the 1967 war against Israel, Palestinians like my father realized they would have to play a commanding role if they ever wanted to return to their homeland.
This was when the Palestinian revolution peaked. The movement spread through Lebanon into our camps. Our demands were simple. We wanted freedom.
My father and his friends were amongst the first to join the PLO.
We opened this office in 1969. We built it with our own hands. We wanted to organize, energize, and educate our people.
Here, just outside Beirut, my father returns to a battlefield where he once fought for Palestine.
We defended this position for 24 hours. In the valleys, such a defense is usually impossible.
I was in the south, which was the main front at that time. The struggle took over our lives.
In those days, Yasser Arafat was not yet a world-known leader.
We met him in Syria in 1969. We were there on a mission to get arms. It was a dark night. We were waiting at the compound gate. There, he personally handed us the arms. I mean, he was an ordinary guy, a fighter, like everyone else at that time.
Though my father took up arms at one point in his life, he believes that true liberation starts in the classroom.
This generation's only option is education. We need people who can address our issues and make our case to the world.
When we come back, what do father and son expect to find when they finally make it to their homeland? The answer will be something far more complex than just crossing a border.